The village of Nuvu rested between hills shaped like sleeping beasts, where wind rustled through tall grasses and the trees whispered stories from the time before people remembered. It was a quiet place, bound by old traditions and unwritten laws that grew heavier with each generation. The kind of place where silence was sometimes safer than truth, and where the lives of girls were often decided long before they learned how to speak for themselves. Amaya was born in such silence. She was the daughter of a healer, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice too calm for storms. Her father had passed before she could walk, taken by illness or curse, depending on who told the story. Her mother raised her alone, teaching her how to grind roots into powders and listen to the way a person breathed to tell what ailed them. Amaya was known to be quiet, observant, and beautiful in the way the moon is beautiful when it does not try to be. Everyone in the village had watched her grow. And when she turned 16, the whispers began. First from the elders. Then from the chief's sons. She was to be one of their brides. It wasn't a question. It was a certainty spoken aloud often enough that it became law. The chief had 4 sons, all older, all loud with entitlement. They had not asked her, not truly. They had boasted, competed, thrown gifts at her feet, and spoken as if she were already theirs. They argued among themselves about who would win her hand, and each was sure he would be the one. Her mother had gone pale when the messengers came. But she said nothing. Tradition was heavier than love. Amaya smiled when required, lowered her gaze and said what was expected. But inside her, something bloomed like a secret flower, defiant and alive. She had already given her heart away. He was not a warrior or a son of wealth. His name was Sephu, and he lived at the edge of the village near the forest, in a round house that smelled of firewood and leather. He was the drum maker. People came to him for weddings, births, harvest blessings and funerals. His hands were always working, soothing the skins, carving the shells, listening with his fingers for the pitch before the drum ever sang. Amaya had watched him from a distance since she was 12. He had noticed her too. But it wasn't until she wandered near his workshop one evening, under the pretense of gathering herbs, that their story truly began. "Do you know what this is?" he asked her, holding up a strip of cowhide stretched between 2 smooth rings of wood. She had shaken her head. He had smiled then, and the smile wasn't sharp or eager. It was gentle like the rising sun. "It's not ready to be a drum yet," he said. "It must dry, stretch. It must wait until it's strong enough to hold the beat." She hadn't answered, but something in her had stirred. From that day she visited often. At first they said little. He taught her how to sand the edges, how to soak the hide, how to press and wait and listen. Over time they began to speak. About dreams, about the future, about the small wishes they buried inside themselves. He told her he wanted to make a drum that sang like thunder but wept like rain. She told him she wanted to be more than someone's bride. They shared stolen moments. A touch on the wrist. A glance that lingered too long. A half-whispered laugh that bloomed into something dangerous. And then one night the moon was too bright and their hearts too full. It was near the clearing behind Sephu's workshop, where the trees bent inward like eaves protecting a secret. He had carved her name into the inside of a drum he said he would never sell. It was hers, he said, even if no one ever heard it. She kissed him. And he kissed her back. Their fingers laced. Time forgot itself. But time never forgets long in a village like Nuvu. The rustling in the bushes came too late. 3 of the chief's sons appeared like vipers from tall grass, their faces twisted in a mix of rage and triumph. They had followed her for days, certain she was hiding something. They had waited for proof. And now they had it. Sephu stood quickly, placing himself between them and Amaya. He said nothing, but his stance spoke louder than his lips ever could. The sons of the chief stepped forward. Amaya shouted for them to stop, pleaded with them. But they only laughed. "You were promised," one of them said. "And you give yourself to a drum carver?" They grabbed Sephu. He didn't fight back, not because he was afraid but because his eyes were locked on Amaya's. He gave her a small shake of his head, a silent instruction. "Don't move. Don't run. Don't make them punish you more." They dragged him into the dark, down the hill toward the river. Amaya followed, screaming but was held back. Her voice broke against the night. The next morning, Sephu's house was empty. His drums gone. His tools gone. No signs of a struggle. No footprints. No notes. Just the unfinished drum he had carved for her, resting gently on the ground, the skin still soft, unshaped. The chief said nothing. The sons never spoke of it again. And no one dared ask where the drum maker had gone. But Amaya knew. She knew in her bones that he had not left willingly. And she knew that love, once shaped, does not vanish. It waits. It listens. And one day, the morning after Sephew vanished, the sun refused to rise clean. It glowed behind a sheet of clouds, pale and smudged, as if it too mourned something the village would not name. The scent of smoke still lingered faintly near Sephew's roundhouse, though nothing had burned. Amaya stood at its edge, barefoot, wrapped in her mother's shawl. She had not slept. She would not cry. She had asked every elder in the village, knocked on doors, spoken the drum maker's name so many times it began to lose shape in her mouth. Every time she asked, the answers changed. He left in the night, someone muttered. He had debts. He was caught stealing. He drowned. Amaya had stared them down one by one. Where's his body? None could answer. Only the chief's sons claimed certainty. She found them lounging near the central fire pit, laughing too loud for men whose hands still smelled of river water. It's sad really, said the tallest one, biting into a mango. We tried to stop him. He ran toward the river. Coward. Must have slipped. Must have. Amaya asked, voice like sharpened stone. The second son leaned forward. We chased a thief. A nobody. You think we pushed him? I think you don't bleed the way other people do, she said. He stood. Watch your tongue, girl. I'll use it while I still have it. The third one stayed silent, eyes dark with something between guilt and calculation. None of them mentioned the bruises on Sephew's throat, the blood under their fingernails. None of them spoke of the moonlight that caught Amaya's scream as they dragged him away. The chief never summoned her. His silence was its own kind of burial. But Amaya did not stop. She went to the river every day. She walked its edge barefoot, as though the soles of her feet could feel the truth in the mud. She waded in up to her waist, letting the current pull at her skirt, eyes scanning the brown water for any sign, any proof that he had not simply vanished. The villagers whispered behind her back now. Poor girl, they said. She's gone mad. She still searches. Grief will rot her. But she ignored them. The river knew. And the river returned all things. That was the oldest saying in the village. The river gave back the bones of the lost. It gave back anklets, cooking spoons, gourds, letters scribbled in bark. Once, it had even returned a mother's earring after her body had been swept down during the flood of years past. But for Sephew there was nothing. No cloth. No skin. No trace. For 7 days, Amaya fasted and sat beneath the river's oldest tree. She offered coins and herbs. She whispered prayers her mother had taught her in childhood, songs to open the ears of water, to stir the heart of a spirit too still. But the river said nothing. On the 8th morning, when the mist still clung low and the fish had not yet begun to leap, she saw it. Drifting down from the bend upstream, turning slow as breath, came a single object. Round. Wooden. Amaya stood. She waded in, heart a fist in her throat. It bumped gently against her legs and she bent down to lift it. Sephew's drum. The one he had carved for her, the one with her name burned inside. The skin stretched tight now, hardened with time but still intact. No scratches. No water damage. Just the drum, clean, silent, as if it had never been lost at all. She clutched it to her chest and sank to her knees in the river. The water pulled at her. It wanted to carry her, to lift her away, but she pressed her feet into the mud and held her ground. You gave him back without his body, she whispered to the current. So what did you take instead? The river didn't answer. But deep below something shifted. A swirl. A soundless breath. She felt it in her bones. When she returned to the village with the drum, the people stepped back. They didn't say it, but they feared her now. Feared the drum that shouldn't have returned. Feared the way she held it, like a vow. Her mother watched her come up the hill and said only, "You found what matters." "No," Amaya said. "I found a peace." At night, she placed the drum beside her bed. She touched its skin like it might pulse. And once, just once, she swore she heard it hum. Not a note. Not a beat. But a breath. And in the dark, Amaya spoke to it. "If you're alive," she whispered, "I'll find the rest of you." And the wind outside the window carried the scent of river water back into the room. Amaya began playing the drum on the 9th night. She had waited, watching it for signs. Waiting for it to pulse again or hum or breathe. But the drum remained still, quiet in the corner of her room like a loyal ghost. Her mother had warned her not to play it, not until they had consulted the spirit seer in the next village. But Amaya had waited long enough. The silence was heavier than a scream. And the drum, it was all she had left of Sephew. So, on the 9th night, just after the moon crested over the tallest tree in Nuvu, she closed her door, locked the windows and set the drum in the center of the mat. She sat cross-legged before it, placed her fingers gently on the skin and struck once. The sound that came was not the soft, clean tone she remembered from Sefu's workshop. It was heavier, lower. As if the drum was deeper now than before, as if something had settled inside it and was waiting to be heard. She struck it again. The rhythm formed without her choosing. Her hands moved without thought. It was not a song she knew, and yet her fingers found it easily, as if they had always known where to land. The beat rolled through the room like distant thunder approaching, slow, deliberate, echoing off the walls and folding itself into the shadows. Outside the wind stopped, and the birds fled the rooftops. By morning the village was stirring with uneasy whispers. "The birds didn't sing last night," said a woman at the well. "My dog howled for hours," said another. Then fell silent. Someone else muttered, "Drums?" "I heard drums. But no feet danced." Amaya said nothing. The next night she played again. And the night after that. Each time the sound changed, subtly, unmistakably. The tone deepened. The echo stretched. Sometimes the beat lingered after she stopped, vibrating in her ribs like an old warning. Sometimes she saw shapes in the corners of the room, flickers that vanished when she turned her head. She wasn't afraid. Not of the drum. But she was changing. Even her mother noticed. "You don't eat much," she said softly one morning, stroking Amaya's hair. "And your eyes are darker than they were." "I'm not sleeping." "Because of the dreams?" Amaya nodded. They had started on the third night of drumming. Not nightmares, not really. But visions, half-formed and smoky, footsteps across water. Hands pressing down into drum skin not to shape it, but to seal something inside. A voice, sometimes Sefu's, sometimes her own, chanting without sound. And always the same beat. Dum, 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 pause, dum. Like a march returning. She kept playing. She couldn't stop. And she wasn't the only one affected. One by one the chief's sons began to change. The youngest, barely 20, woke screaming from a dream of being buried alive while blood dripped on his face from above. The second saw Sefu walking through the trees at dusk, eyes hollow, carrying the same drum Amaya now owned. The oldest son refused to sleep at all. "I hear it," he muttered to the others. "Every time I close my eyes. That damn drum. Beating in the dark. Someone's hands are playing it, but they're covered in blood. I see fingers with no skin." The middle brother, the quietest, tried to dismiss it. "It's just guilt," he snapped. "We didn't kill him. He drowned." "You said that before," the oldest snarled. "But what if the river didn't keep him?" That night the middle brother took ill. His body shook. His nose bled. And all through the night he murmured in his sleep, Sefu's name over and over again. The next morning the chief summoned the elders. And the elders summoned Amaya. She came with the drum tucked beneath her shawl, wrapped in cloth, but the sound of it still echoed faintly as she walked. The people cleared from her path as if she carried a snake. They didn't meet her eyes. At the center of the village the elders sat in a circle. The chief's son stood behind them, pale and drawn, as if they had all aged 10 winters in a week. "Amaya," one of the elders said cautiously, "what is this we hear about a cursed drum?" "I play it." "What are you calling with it?" another asked. "I don't call anything. I listen." The chief's eyes narrowed. "You lie." "No," she said, unwrapping the drum slowly. "But you do." The cloth fell away. Gasps rose. For on the skin of the drum, pale at first but now fully visible, were markings. Handprints. Dark, red and smeared like old blood, but when touched they left no stain. The elders recoiled. The chief's sons froze. "The drum wasn't cursed," she said, voice calm and clear. "Until you made it so." "What do you mean?" "You took him. You drowned him. Or tried to." The youngest son stepped forward, trembling. "We never found the body. Because the river didn't let you." She struck the drum once. The sound echoed across the clearing. And somewhere in the trees a bird fell dead from a branch. She looked at them all. "I don't need to curse you," she said. "You're doing it yourselves. The drum just plays what's already inside." Her mother appeared at the edge of the crowd, eyes full of warning. But Amaya turned and walked away, the drum still beating softly against her hip, as if it knew the next verse in the song that had only just begun. And behind her, 3 brothers dreamt of hands they could not escape. Ask ChatGPT. The harvest moon rose low and swollen, casting long gold shadows over the village of Nuvu. It was the night of the autumn feast, when fires were lit in the center of the village, and the scent of roasted yam, palm wine and honeyed plantains thickened the air. Children darted between dancers, and old women sang the songs that their grandmothers had once whispered into bowls of cassava. The drums rolled with joy, loud and warm. But Amaya did not dance. She stood beneath the baobab tree at the edge of the gathering, her drum clutched close to her chest. Her mother had begged her not to bring it. "Tonight is for peace," she'd said. "Let the dead rest and the living breathe." Amaya had smiled, but her fingers had traced the ridges of the drum's skin like prayer. She hadn't meant to play. But she couldn't leave it behind. Across the fire, the chief's sons stood together, draped in embroidered cloths and gold bangles, trying too hard to appear at ease. Their eyes flicked to her every few minutes. They laughed, whispered, elbowed one another with sharp jabs. And then, when she passed behind them to fetch a cup of millet brew, it happened. The second son chuckled first. The others followed, too loud, too forced. A ragged chorus of laughter. But as their laughter rose into the air, something about it bent. It folded back, shifted. It no longer sounded like laughter. It sounded like mockery. And it did not stop. Even after they had gone quiet, the laughter kept echoing, looping through the open air as though someone else had picked it up and begun laughing for them. It was wrong. Wrong in the way a broken flute still plays a note, but a note that curdles the ear. People turned to look. The third son's face went pale. "Did you hear?" The eldest cut him off with a hiss. "Quiet." But others had heard it too. The laughter rang again, circling, echoing, bouncing off stone and tree and ear. Like something ancient had caught the joke and was retelling it in a voice no one wanted to know. Amaya did not react. She stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the fire. And the drum against her hip beat once. No one saw her hands move. The laughter finally died. The feast continued, but slower, quieter. The drums faltered. The dancers moved with less certainty, glancing over their shoulders, unsure of what they'd just witnessed. Amaya left before the last song was sung. She said nothing to her mother, who waited at the gate. She went to bed with the drum beside her, as always. And in the chief's compound, the sons could not sleep. The youngest tossed and turned, drenched in sweat, his mouth open in a silent scream. The second moaned low, fists clenched, dreaming of red rivers and the scent of burning hide. And the eldest, the one who had laughed hardest, awoke gasping. His throat was dry, his tongue thick. He sat up in the dark and coughed, and something gritty spilled from his mouth onto the floor. He lit a lantern and stared. Soil. Black, damp, and smelling of the riverbank. He spat again. More soil. He screamed. The others rushed in, their eyes wide, their skin pale with fear. "Your mouth, what happened?" the second asked. The eldest pointed to the floor, where a clump of earth now lay like a grave torn open too early. They didn't speak after that. Not even to the chief. The next morning word spread like oil fire. "The sons are cursed," someone whispered. "It's the drum," said another. "She's playing it wrong." "Not wrong," said one of the elders quietly. "Just honestly." They watched Amaya walk to the river as she did each dawn, the drum still at her side. And when she passed, no one laughed. That night she played again. Not a song. Not a rhythm anyone had ever taught her. Just a beat pulled from bone and memory. A pulse that echoed like footsteps climbing out of water. And far off the laughter returned. But this time it didn't mock. It promised. It began on a night with no moon, the sky thick with cloud and the smell of coming rain. Amaya had finished her evening drumming, just 4 steady beats, enough to hush the shadows pressing in at her windows, and had settled into bed with her eyes wide open, unable to rest. Something was tugging at her. Not inside her chest, but just beyond the walls. A pull. A weight. A memory knocking softly at the edge of her senses. She rose, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and slipped barefoot into the night. The village was hushed. No firelight. No voices. Even the insects had gone still, as if they too had grown wary of singing while her drums still hummed in the air. She walked past the old goat pen, past the empty grinding stones, and down the path that led to the tree. The baobab stood at the edge of the fields, taller than any house, its bark split like old skin, its branches wide like arms frozen in welcome or warning. It was where she and Sephew had first touched hands. Where he'd told her the drum was hers. Where they had kissed, beneath a sky that no longer looked the same. She stopped 10 paces from the tree. And there he was. Not Sephew. Not his body. Just the shape of him. A tall silhouette leaning against the trunk, arms folded the way he used to, one foot propped behind him, relaxed in the way only Sephew had been. Amaya did not breathe. She didn't dare blink. The figure didn't move. But it was him. She knew it the way one knows the sound of their own name. She stepped forward. Sephew? No answer. She reached out. The shadow stayed still. Then she asked softly, "Why won't you speak?" That's when it moved. Not away. Not toward her. It began to dance. Slow. Measured. Not like joy. Not like celebration. The kind of dance that follows grief. The kind performed when drums are struck low, close to the earth, to keep the dead from wandering too far. His arms curled and dropped. His body bent as if carrying something heavy. His feet slid across the dirt, never rising, as though he feared waking something buried beneath it. It was beautiful. And it was angry. She could see it in the jerks of his shoulder, in the sudden snaps of his neck as he turned, in the weight behind each twist and step. This was not a ghost. It was morning made solid. Amaya stood rooted to the ground, eyes wide, heart trembling. And still the shadow danced. Around the base of the tree. Back and forth. Toward her. Away. It circled once. Twice. A third time and then stopped. The branches above groaned with wind, though the air remained still. The leaves whispered her name. She took one step forward. If you're him, show me. But the shadow began to fade. Not all at once. Bit by bit, like smoke drifting backward into a bottle. Until only the curve of a shoulder remained. Then a foot. Then nothing. She stood there long after it vanished. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply pressed her hand to the trunk of the baobab and whispered, "I'll wait. I'm still here." And when she turned to walk back to the village, she noticed the faint prints in the dirt behind her, 2 sets of feet. One her own. And one that walked beside her. Ask ChatGPT. The announcement came like thunder on a cloudless day. At the village square, with woven banners fluttering in the wind and the elders gathered in their ceremonial cloth, the chief's 2 eldest sons stepped forward. One wore crimson, the other gold. Their father raised his staff and said in his rusted, ceremonial voice, "On the rising sun of the 7th day, my sons will marry. 2 brides. 2 blessings. And the bloodline continues." The crowd clapped politely, though some eyes darted toward Amaya. The air held tension, quiet and crooked. Amaya stood at the edge of the gathering with her mother. She said nothing, but her fingers tapped against her drum, slow and absent. The rhythm barely audible. Still, a few villagers stepped farther from her, as if even silence could burn. Her mother leaned in close. "You're not surprised. They've been trying to cleanse their guilt," Amaya replied. "Marriage is just another kind of mask. Don't say that out loud." "I don't need to," she said. "The drum already has." That evening, the village buzzed with preparations. Daughters were called to braid hair. Hunters returned early with offerings of meat. Drummers practiced beneath the mango trees. Everyone acted as though joy had been planted in the earth. But joy does not bloom in poisoned soil. That night, long after the fires dimmed and most lanterns were snuffed, Amaya sat in her room with the drum resting in her lap. Her hands hovered above the skin but did not touch it. The drum pulsed on its own now, faint vibrations like a second heartbeat beneath her own, as if something inside it wanted out. She held her breath, waiting. Then came the sound. Not from her drum, but from the village. Distant. Full. Drums. Not like the feast drums or the wedding drums. These beats were darker. Slower. Like a march of something long dead but still walking. The rhythm matched a pattern she had only heard in dreams. She rose to her feet, listening. The air grew heavier. Then came the scream. It tore through the night, sharp and high, from the compound of the chief. A woman's voice. Amaya didn't wait. She threw on her shawl, tucked her drum under her arm and ran. When she arrived, half the village was already gathered, torches flickering, murmurs flying like mosquitoes. The younger son's bride-to-be, Naledi, a sweet girl with shy eyes and a voice like singing wind, stood barefoot in the courtyard, trembling, her hands covered in ash. "She says she saw something," someone whispered. "No, someone," corrected another. "A man." But, wrong. Naledi's aunt tried to cover her shoulders, but she flinched at every touch. "I was brushing my hair," Naledi said, eyes wide, "and I saw him, standing outside my window. He was tall. His clothes were soaked. He had no face. Just nothing. Smooth like wet bark." Her voice shook. "He didn't speak. He tapped on the window. 3 times. Then disappeared." The younger son, her fiancé, pushed through the crowd. "You imagined it. You're letting her poison your mind." He jabbed a finger at Amaya, who said nothing. Naledi looked at him, tears cutting down her cheeks. "I know what I saw. It was not a dream." The chief stepped forward, voice firm. "This is nothing but nerves. Weddings summon spirits of anxiety. Rest, child. We'll post guards tonight. But guards cannot keep out what walks between beats. Amaya turned to leave. That night she did not sleep. She waited. And when the wind turned cold and the windows of her room rattled with a beat that matched no human hand, she struck her drum once. The sound silenced the night. No birds sang. No crickets chirped. Just that one note hanging like smoke in the air. She whispered, "Sephew." And far across the village the wedding drums cracked, split clean down their centers, strings snapping like old tendons. The wood smoked. And somewhere near Naladi's window, a second set of footprints formed in the soil. Still wet. Still walking. The sun rose as if reluctantly, its rays pale and trembling behind thick clouds that should not have been there. This was supposed to be a day of joy, of blessings and full bellies and the pounding rhythm of marriage drums. Instead, the wind arrived first, cold, bitter, sour with something foul, and then the silence. Not even the birds dared sing. In the center of the village, where the ritual fire was to be lit, the chief stood with his sons and the elders. The altar had been decorated the night before with woven mats, goat horns, garlands of river lilies, and a large mound of firewood shaped into a pyramid. A sacred fire must be lit before the wedding procession could begin. It had always been so. But the fire would not catch. The priest's hands trembled as he struck the flint again and again. The wood remained cold. Dry leaves crumbled. Sparks flickered, hovered, and died in the air. "I do not understand," he muttered. The wood was blessed. It should burn. "Strike harder," barked the elder son, face taut. They tried oil. Dried coconut husks. Even strips of old cloth. Still nothing. The crowd began murmuring, shuffling backward. Someone whispered a prayer under their breath. Then came the second omen. The meat, goat and chicken butchered in the early morning began to rot. A sickly stench curled from the roasting pits. Flies buzzed in thick clouds. The flesh blackened as though it had been sitting for days instead of hours. Children gagged. One of the brides fainted. The air had changed. Everything felt too still. Too watched. Elders turned to one another. "It is the drum," one said. "She plays it again." "But she's not here," another answered. "She doesn't need to be." Amaya remained in her home, seated in the center of her room, the drum between her knees. She played softly, so soft that those nearest her house could only feel it, like the echo of a heartbeat just beyond hearing. The notes she struck were slow, steady, deliberate. Each one was a call. Each one said, "Come." Each one said, "Remember." She had not attended the ceremony. She had not dressed in mourning white or celebration cloth. Her mother had tried to beg her to go, to watch, to protect herself. But Amaya had only said, "He walks in daylight now. They need to see him." And so she played. Outside, in the open air of the wedding ground, a shadow passed behind the trees. Some guests saw it and blinked, confused. Others turned suddenly, feeling breath on their necks, but saw nothing. And then, from the northern edge of the compound, just beyond the altar, the figure appeared. He wore no color. No fabric. Just damp, dark skin, the hue of wet soil, and a shape that flickered, solid but not still. He moved without sound. And he had no face. The crowd froze. The chief's son saw him last. The younger stumbled backward, breath caught in his throat. The elder did not move. His eyes locked on the figure. His jaw clenched. The figure took a step forward. And the elder son said hoarsely, "That's not a man." But the third brother, the one who had said least, whose eyes had grown hollower each day since the cursed drum began to play, whispered, "That's him." Gasps followed. The faceless man stood tall now, arms at his sides. From his right hand hung something round and worn. A drum. Not like Amaya's. Older. Darker. Worn by water and time. Still it hummed. And as he raised it with both hands and struck a single beat, the ground trembled. The ritual fire burst into black smoke and died entirely. The sky dimmed as though mourning the lie. Back in her home, Amaya felt the drum's answer ripple through her body. Her hands stilled. Her eyes filled. "You found them," she whispered. The village did not scream. It watched, silenced, stunned, shackled by the truth they had long buried and pretended never existed. And as the faceless figure began to walk forward toward the chief's sons, his shadow stretching longer than it should, the village understood that weddings cannot be built on blood. And the dead do not forget. Especially not when they are still walking. The feast began because it had to. Even though the fire had refused to burn, even though the meat had spoiled, even though the sky still hung too low and too dark for celebration, the elders insisted the music be played. A marriage must be sealed with dance, they said, their voices thin, their eyes darting toward the trees. So the drums began again hesitantly. The flutes followed. People gathered in the center square trying to shake off the weight pressing on their backs. The laughter was forced. The smiles cracked too easily. Still they danced. Children spun in uneven circles. Women swayed in time with the drums. Men clapped too loudly. The chief's 2 sons, dressed now in their ceremonial cloths, their gold glinting in the dying light, stood together barely speaking. Their brides did not dance. One sat trembling. The other refused to leave the threshold of her hut. And Amaya did not appear. But the drumming continued. Not hers. Not yet. It started as a rhythm from the musicians. Then shifted. Just slightly. A thread of something older wove into the beat, a pulse from elsewhere, heavier, slower, like footsteps in wet earth. The musicians didn't seem to notice. But the dancers began to falter. A few stopped. A few looked behind them, confused. And then he arrived. Not Sephiu. Not the man. Just the shadow. It glided into the crowd like smoke blown through branches, tall, formless, but familiar. It cast no light. It made no sound. It brushed through dancers without touching them, and yet they shivered. None noticed at first. Not until it stopped beside the chief's sons. And danced. It began with a slow turn, one leg lifting then dropping, shoulders rolling like a wave. The arms curved above its head, fluid and silent. Its feet never left the earth, yet the ground seemed to move beneath them. One by one people saw, and stepped back. They said nothing. But the music faltered. And still the shadow danced. The chief's eldest son went stiff. The youngest's mouth fell open. Neither ran. Neither breathed. Because somehow they knew. This was no spirit from the forest. No demon or cursed ghost. This was him. The man they dragged to the river. The man who had clawed at their hands as they held him under. The man whose drum had floated back, but whose body had never returned. And now his shadow danced beside them, not with rage, but with memory. The exact dance Sephiu used to perform in joy, now twisted with sorrow, with mourning, with something the world had no name for. The youngest son dropped to his knees. The eldest remained still as stone. And behind them the musicians stopped playing entirely. Now it was only the beat from somewhere else. From Amaya. She had begun to drum in her home, 3 beats and a pause, 3 beats and a pause. Calling him. Guiding him. Sephiu's shadow moved faster now, the dance more urgent, more violent. The dust rose in spirals around its feet. Its arms became jagged, then loose again. It dropped low, spun, lunged toward the brothers. But didn't touch. Never had to. The dancers fled. The crowd scattered. Only the brothers remained, surrounded by silence and dust and the weight of what they had done. And the shadow kept dancing, as if nothing in the world could stop the song that vengeance had made. Ask ChatGPT. The square was nearly empty now. Where moments before there had been dancers, drums, and forced laughter, now only silence remained, thick and choking, draped over the village like a shroud. Dust from the shadow's dance still floated in the air, glowing faintly in the dying light. The only ones left standing were the chief's sons, their bodies frozen in place, faces pale with fear. Sephiu's shadow moved no more. It stood tall between them, one arm raised to each side. Then slowly, deliberately, it lowered both hands. And touched their chests. The youngest son gasped first. A sharp, ragged sound as if something inside him had just been yanked loose. His hands flew to his throat. He dropped to his knees, choking on air that wouldn't enter. His eyes bulged and his lips trembled, shaping words no one could hear. Then the eldest followed. He didn't scream. He simply folded at the waist, convulsing. His body thrashed like a fish tossed onto dry land, limbs stiff and uncoordinated. Blood trickled from his nose. Then from his ears. He tried to speak but vomited dirt. The villagers watched from a distance. No one moved closer. Not even the priest. Not even their father, the chief, who stood rooted beneath the sacred tree, eyes hollow and unreadable. The shadow kept its hands on them, light but firm, as if weighing their lives. As if pressing something into them or pulling something out. Then the drum began again. From far off, Amaya's home. 3 beats and a pause. But now louder. Echoing. The rhythm pulsed through the earth. Through the bones of everyone who remained. The villagers pressed hands to their ears, not from pain but from memory. The beat spoke a truth too heavy to bear. 3 beats. Pause. The elder son's eyes rolled back. 3 beats. Pause. The younger son shuddered, and stilled. The shadow bent its head as if listening to the final breath pass from each of them. Their bodies collapsed side by side. And still no one dared step forward. Then slowly Sefu's shadow stood tall once more. It looked around the square, not with eyes but with presence. With knowing. It had no face but every soul it passed felt seen. When its gaze settled on the chief, the old man trembled, but said nothing. The shadow took one last step back. Then disappeared, folding inward like smoke into a bottle, like memory into silence. The dust it left behind curled into two perfect spirals, one over each fallen sun. And the only sound that remained was the drum. 3 beats. Pause. Then nothing. Amaya did not run. She walked. Through the village paths littered with flower petals meant for celebration, past overturned benches and broken calabashes, past elders with downcast eyes and women clutching their children's arms too tightly. The silence parted for her like a veil. Not even the wind dared disturb her steps. She carried the drum in both hands. Not cradled. Not hidden. Held with reverence like a vessel. The square was nearly empty when she arrived. Only the fallen sons remained, still, cold, eyes wide but seeing nothing. Their bodies looked small now, fragile in a way that made some part of her ache. Sefu's shadow waited near the center. It stood motionless, arms at its sides, head slightly bowed, as though the act was finished and it was only waiting for the curtain to fall. The dust still curled faintly around its feet. Where the others had feared it, Amaya saw something else. Not anger. Not vengeance. Release. She stepped into the square and crossed the space between them, unhurried. Her bare feet made soft sounds on the earth. The drum never left her hands. When she reached the center she sat. Legs folded. Back straight. Drum resting gently in her lap. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply began to play. 3 beats and a pause. 3 beats and a pause. Then 4. Then none. She let the silence speak where the rhythm once lived. The shadow turned toward her. And bowed. It was not a deep bow. Not theatrical. But real. A lowering of head and shoulder. A breath passed through a body that no longer breathed. Then with the gentlest motion, barely a shift, it stepped backward once. Twice. And vanished. There was no smoke. No swirl of leaves or shriek of wind. He was simply gone. And in his place, a stillness so complete it felt sacred. Amaya sat a while longer. She looked at the 2 bodies. She looked at the people still watching from the edges. And then she rose. She walked home with the drum in her hands. No one followed. No one spoke. The chief buried his sons that same night, without a song, without a drum, without the village's usual dancing or wine. The earth swallowed them like it had waited years for that very moment. The next day no one mentioned the wedding. A week passed. Then a month. Amaya returned to her quiet routines, fetching water, helping her mother, sitting beneath the baobab in the evenings. She never played the drum again in public. But the village changed. They began to leave mirrors at their thresholds. They stopped whispering her name behind closed doors. And at every wedding since, no matter how joyous, no matter how brightly the sun shone, the musicians would lift their drums and never strike the first beat. Not until the bride was safely home. Just in case he was still listening. Ask ChatGPT.